Welcome to another edition of the CHCH Newsmakers podcast. I'm your host, Rick Zamperin. He is one of Canada's most prominent and decorated foreign correspondents, a Canadian journalist who witnessed firsthand some of the most pivotal moments of our lifetime. And he shares many of those memorable moments in his new book called On the Ground, My Life as a Foreign Correspondent. His name is Brian Stewart, and he joins us now on Newsmakers. Brian, thanks for joining us today. This was a phenomenal read. I absolutely enjoyed it.
Well, thank you very much, Rick. That's very nice to hear.
And I love how you get us right into the game. We're in Ethiopia. It's the early 80s, and you come across a father and his near-death daughter. Bring the reader to where you are.
Okay, this is October, November 1984, just before November. We had been one of two crews to get into northern Ethiopia to cover what had been a covered-up famine, and we were in a feeding center with hundreds of children, very sick, and families in dire straits. And I saw this out of my corner of my eye, this one girl collapse onto the pavement, and I called to a nurse. Nurse, can we possibly save this girl? And the nurse picked her up and ran her into a small feeding center. We were told she would die within 15 minutes, and we had images of her face that just struck me as an image of really Ethiopia in utter despair, looking out to the world. So we left to leave her to die in dignity. Came back a few hours later to cover her funeral. Burials took place almost immediately in a situation like a mass famine. And she was being held in the arms of a nurse, and she was alive. They told us that they'd given her a final needle, and miraculously, in their eyes, she had survived. And I followed up her story by revisiting her a few weeks later in the hospital with a story that, if she can survive, maybe Ethiopia can survive, because up to that moment, it looked like the whole of the northern country was going to be swept away in just unbelievable scenes of starvation. And her face went on to be shown at Live Aid and the second Live Aid 20 years later. And it very much became the face of famine, one that caused the greatest outpouring of emotion and donations during the British Live Aid concert, and she was very well known in Canada because of the documentaries and stories I did on her life. And a few years after that, I went back to find her because I couldn't bear the thought of her just being out there somewhere, us not knowing where her family was. And didn't expect to find her, but did. And I looked, we did a documentary on her, and I started supporting the family, and we're friends to this day. We're very good friends. We now Zoom back and forth, her family and mine.
That is unbelievable.
That's a condensed version of what was a long saga, which had a seminal impact on my career and my life. Both my career changed after that, and in many ways my life as well.
When you first went back to Ethiopia to reconnect with her and her father, were they expecting you to arrive, and what was that meeting like?
Not at all. They hardly remembered the appearance of this strange foreign crew with a camera from the beginning. So they were sort of plucked by local officials and told some foreigners have come to find you, and they were taken to a kind of a village that was prepared for media. And she was, then we arrived and we saw her. Recognized her immediately, same face. Her face was somehow one of those faces that stand out. And of course, I recognized her father right away. I was very impressed by her dad. He was a wonderful man. And these had come from a life in the hills of Ethiopia where, their illiteracy was 100% virtually. They had no schooling. She was the first in her family ever to go visit a school. Had enormous hardships, not only in the famine, but in resettlement movements and the rest of it. And I knew when I saw her and her father and saw the rest of her family that there's no way I could ever just go away again. And that sort of forged the bond.
All those years ago, Peter Mansbridge told you that this Ethiopian famine report that you were doing was going to follow you for the rest of your life, and it really has. And You know, to read about famine is one thing. To see it firsthand like you did is another. What was going through your mind? What were you thinking about as you were in the midst of this, thousands upon thousands of people who are clinging to life?
You know, I thought I had prepared myself to go into the famine. I'd already covered wars. I'd been a large part of that year in Beirut during the Civil War. I'd seen a lot of death, a lot of misery, and I thought, you know, I'll really prepare for the famine. I studied hard to prepare myself. I got myself fit as I could get. Nothing could prepare me for what we saw when we hit the ground. I said it looked like apocalypse, the world after a nuclear holocaust. There was, you know, dust blowing across the skies, hundreds of thousands of people on the road seeking out very few feeding centers, millions of people, really, up to 7 million people were estimated by the UN to be at risk of starvation. Wow. I had never seen anything like it, and I actually had never imagined anything like it, which, you know, it's hard to get to a point where things are far worse than you can even imagine in nightmares. But this was kind of a nightmarish event. And it put incredible pressure on us because we were the only crew from North America, and there was one BBC crew. And we knew we had to alert the world. If we didn't alert the world, probably no other crews would be allowed in. Pictures wouldn't come out after us. And this horrible disaster would just go on with not nearly enough world response. So we did the very best we could. And fortunately, the CBC ran it to the max. So they ran all our reports. We were feeding out documentaries at the same time. And to my enormous, how can I put this, feelings of relief, Canada reacted in a way that I think beat out anything it had ever done in peacetime before or has since. The government and the people of Canada formed this bond, this partnership to save Ethiopia and other places in Africa suffering from famine. And it became one of the most moving moments of Canadian foreign policy and aid at that same time. And of course, the British effort, our good friends at the BBC, their reports led to Live Aid, and together it really did alert the world. And thank God for that, because if it had not, I don't know, the death toll in northern Ethiopia would have, I think, gone into the millions. As it was, 1 million did die. It was that serious, but 7 million were at risk.
It's unbelievable still to this day to think about it. Our guest is Brian Stewart. He's the author of On the Grounds, My Life as a Foreign Correspondent. You can grab the book in your favorite bookstore, online or otherwise. I really like how you intertwine, going overseas, your childhood. You were born in Montreal. You grew up there, Halifax, and in England as well. Where was the love for news, and why did you want to become a foreign correspondent? Where did that begin?
I've looked back on that many times trying to figure it out myself. And part of it is, I think I was born in the middle of the Second World War, which made me really a post-war baby, a Cold War baby. I grew up at a time, a child, where war was always talked about. We were taught a lot of history in school. We had a sense of sort of crisis in the world. And I found it very interesting. Sports was more interesting, but I found news from a very early age interesting. When I was going to, England in my early teens, I watched on television a war breakout in Egypt over the Suez Crisis, where England, France, and Israel invaded Egypt to try and win back the canal. And also at the very same time, the Budapest rose up in the Hungarian uprising. And I saw people there with notebooks and cameras, and I thought, boy, people get paid to actually see history in the making. And I'd been so interested in history as a child, I thought, what could ever be better than to sit at the ringside seat of history? So I wrote an essay when I was 14 in school, say, when I grow up, I want to be a foreign correspondent. And really that mystified my teachers and my fellow students and my parents, for sure. But that was my writing vision from there on. That's what I always wanted to be, and that's what I became.
I think your first job was the Oshawa Times, but you soon found yourself at the Montreal Gazette, writing about some pretty big stories. What was life like in Montreal in those days?
This was sort of the mid to late 60s, and it was just a phenomenal place to be a reporter. Just the best place, I think, in the world, actually, at that time. It was the centennial year. It was the year in which Canada was on the world saying, here we are, cool Canada, really. And it was filled with excitement and international air and a wonderful, pleasant place to live, of course. It was sort of a party city. And at the same time, you had this separatist campaign for separate Quebec, and you had, an underground guerrilla force, the FLQ, setting off bombs and threatening revolution and what have you. I was there for the great October crisis of 1970, when the British diplomat was kidnapped, and also a Quebec minister was kidnapped and murdered. And the Canadian Army came in, and I was right at the ground zero of this at the Montreal City Hall, which was my beat. And I was there for that event. And really, it was just a magical place. I don't want to make an awful crisis seem fun or magical. But if you're in the news business and the news keeps coming to you day after day, and it's always exciting news that had to be explained. I had a column, which was a wonderful thing to have, just the best thing in journalism, to sort of explain politics and explain what was going on. I was very happy there in print. I was basically a print reporter, never thought of TV. And then one day TV came calling, and that changed a lot of things right there.
I want to get to that decision to get into TV, but before we do that, you were at the Montreal Gazette. I think this was the time, and I didn't know this until I read it in your book, that you coined the phrase Trudeau mania. Where did that come from?
Others have claimed it or been claimed, but in print, I had it. And I'm not very proud of it, which is interesting. I was put on the Trudeau campaign trail during that famous summer, and he had his biggest rally in Toronto City, outside City Hall. And I think it was in July. And I wrote a piece saying there wasn't that much sign of Trudeau mania here today, as such as we've seen. And that apparently was the first time it was ever used in print. And when I got back to my office in Montreal, a very grumpy city editor came up to me and said, why did you have to use that awful word? Now it's been spread around the media. Others are starting to use it, and it's only going to make this dreadful man more popular. So I was made to feel very guilty. And I've always had mixed feelings about it. It was kind of cheap of me. I just come back from England and years of Beatlemania and what have you. So putting the mania onto Trudeau was not a great leap of mental effort. So there it was. The word was out there. And I kind of got stuck with it to some degree in the media, though others will claim it. They can have it. I'm glad to give it to anyone else who wants it.
You mentioned TV earlier, and CBC TV came courting you, but you didn't see a future in TV, or television news didn't appeal to you. Why was that?
Well, I never even considered a TV career. When I went to Ryerson Journalism School, we had a course in TV along with our print newspaper course, and I was very frightened to be in a studio, and I thought standing in front of a camera with this big black lens was kind of terrifying. And I always thought, who wants to go into TV? News is print. This was the great era of print, covering world events in the old style. And they came and asked me if I wanted to be, or if I would be, the one of the local hosts of the Supper Hour show. And I sort of said, well, I'll take it on for a year to see. Different motives. I thought it would be kind of fun to be a micro celebrity just for a year in Montreal. But really, I also had in the back of my mind the thought that, TV has more foreign bureaus than print in these days. And if I want to become a foreign correspondent, maybe CBC is the right road to go. And that's really what led me into it, though I spent 7 years off the bat working in Ottawa as CBC's National News' first investigative reporter and breaking stories and things like that. I kept after my dream, and I kept studying foreign affairs, and eventually in 1980, I became a sort of foreign correspondent. And I got the London Bureau, which was the top bureau basically in Canadian broadcast journalism to have. So it was a wonderful move in the end, but it was a move that kind of tortured me because I wasn't good at TV in the beginning at all. I guess like a lot of print people who go into TV, I was awful. I didn't know how to deliver on camera properly. I was horrified, terrified actually of been on a lens. People today are so used to having pictures taken of them in front of eye cameras or whatever they call them and what have you. They're very used to lenses. Back in those days, it was a big event to stand in front of a TV camera lens and talk. Very frightening at first. I got used to it, and I was well trained by CBC in the process.
I was going to say, how long did it take for you to find it appealing after a while? Was it 3 months, 6 months, a year? Did it take a year?
How about 2 years?
Wow.
I said it was two years where I kept saying, what am I doing in this business? And maybe I'll go back to print if they'll have me. I mean, I was a nervous wreck. And I didn't enjoy at first the discipline of TV writing is a very big change from print. Mm-hmm. And often print people looked down on it as sort of a cheaper form of writing, but it was quite the reverse. I mean, you have to be very skilled to encompass a news story with all its complexity in these short items and then to explainer items. So learning to write properly for a medium where the pictures are taken care of, so you don't have to describe everything you're seeing, but you have to sort of get the news across. It's a discipline that has to be learned, and because I hadn't studied it in school, I sort of learned it on the job. And I had some months where really I thought I should leave because I thought, and I don't think I was alone in this opinion, that I stank on TV.
You finally ended up in Ottawa. You broke a couple of big stories connected to the RCMP, and I won't give everything away. You're going to have to read the book to find out the big stories that Brian was breaking along the way. But you finally got your first foreign correspondent role. How did it come about, and how did you feel the first time you were delivering your first report?
Well, I have been seen as a future foreign correspondent because I did a lot of the international stories in Ottawa, and I was very connected to the External Affairs Department, as their foreign ministry was at the time called, and I had done some travels with the Prime Minister abroad. So I had a real interest in international affairs, and of course I had studied it abroad. So they would pick me to go on these sort of tryout trips. I would travel on the Pope John Paul II's very first foreign trip to Mexico. Then I did a series of documentaries out of South America on the oppression of the police states that were now under sway, fairly dangerous stories, but fascinating ones. And they sort of were looking at me and how I delivered abroad, and they thought I was the one, and that's how basically I got to London. So I was really a foreign correspondent before I was named a foreign correspondent. I had the great world of living in Canada, but spending a lot of time overseas doing these reports. But then when I went to London, of course, I was overseas, and that's when I faced an entirely different world where the London Bureau was really responsible. We shared kind of the world with Paris Bureau. I covered most of Africa, part of the Middle East, part of Europe. We shared Poland. We sort of divided up the world in those days, like, 19th century diplomats or something before a map. And so we were on the road almost all the time. It was a very, very busy life with a lot of travel and a lot of adventure. A lot of fun, I have to say.
You covered the Falklands War. You're in Beirut, apartheid in South Africa, El Salvador. And these aren't very safe places. I mean, you're in a war zone. How did you deal with that?
I used to call myself the last of the cowardly correspondents. I was by no means a great daredevil. I was basically a bit of a coward. I thought that that streak of cowardice in me would keep me doing safer things and dangerous things and might look after my hide. But I always knew there was a risk. I mean, I lost colleagues very tragically in the field. I knew death was a possibility. It was kind of a risk and reward deal. To get the great reward that you're seeking, which is to see history made, and also be out there among the great adventures and tragedies and humanitarian needs of the world, is an enormous privilege. And to do that, you had to go with the risk as well. And, that made domestic life pretty hard, to say the least. But it was something in those hectic years, I just, like all the other foreign correspondents, I bet I could keep myself safe And I just wanted to be there enough that I was willing to face the threat, not just of death, but of injury. And what really scared me a lot, to be frank, was kidnapping. Increasingly, reporters started to be kidnapped by various political factions and even organized crime units. So it was dangerous from that point of view as well. So you always had to be kind of wary of the dangers, but not let it weigh you down to the point that you wouldn't leave the hotel and you wouldn't go out in the field on a given day. You just had to live with it. And you got kind of accustomed to it, where it was the normal. You were living in a good deal of anxiety, but at the same time, you had great camaraderie. You partied a lot. Those were the days when journalists really partied abroad. So you had a kind of mix of the daring, the fun, the reflective. All of those things were wrapped into a very interesting life.
You are in all these places. You're still working for the CBC, and some of your CBC colleagues are getting scooped up by American networks. And it wasn't long before an American network said, "Hey, Brian, we'd love for you to work with us." You eventually did. Was there hesitation to jump ship?
A lot. I turned down a number of requests from the Americans because I frankly wasn't interested in going to the Americans. I loved the CBC, and I was given great opportunities by the CBC. During a period of my life when I think I was suffering from the first waves of that after Ethiopia shock, and I began to despair of life on the road and life as a reporter, with the CBC, I don't know why I thought it might clear my head a bit to get out of London and go to the Americans. So in a weak moment, I said yes. And the next thing I know, I'm scooped up into the arms of NBC, this giant network, and its rich ways, and flown to New York, and then based in Frankfurt, Germany, and all that. It was a weird adventure for me to undertake, and I don't think I frankly would have undertaken it. Was I not in some kind of mental throes at the time where I was trying to escape my life, escape what I was doing. Why I thought it was a good idea to escape into the American networks, I have no idea. But within about a year and a half, I realized that this was not the place where I wanted to be, and I wanted to actually at one stage leave news and get into humanitarian work, which is why I left the Americans and came back to Canada thinking I would link up with one of the great humanitarian groups. But when I was back, I was offered a great job with the Journal CBC, and I couldn't resist that. And it was a great choice to take it. Sorry to wrap up so much and quickly like this, but in all this time, I really was wrestling with an inner demon or an inner something, guilt, that I could have done more in Ethiopia. Why reporters face this so often when they witness these horrors of life, and they witness it over and over again. No matter what they do that is good, they often come away with the guilt feeling, well, I could have done more. Surely I had some change in my pocket I could have given out. Maybe this woman and her children by the side of the road we could have put in our van and driven to a feeding center, even though there were 50, 100, 1,000 other families on the same side of the same road. You can't do that, but you come away with an inner demon, which you may want to get into or not, but that was a major motivating force at some different periods of my career.
You definitely, at least I did, get that sense of emotion and trying to do more, trying to help more people from your book, On the Ground, My Life as a Foreign Correspondent. We're in discussion with Brian Stewart. He's the author of this new book, which you can get at your favorite bookstore. I want to ask you, which assignment did you consider the most dangerous, or maybe because it was dangerous and you knocked it out of the park, maybe the most rewarding?
Well, certainly the most dangerous was actually El Salvador. I felt that I was in there in the Civil War period where the military government, right-wing military government had waged war not only on the guerrillas, but pretty much on the media. And reporters were being shot at and kidnapped and tortured, never found again. And a whole Norwegian crew of 4 was murdered around the time that I went in with the CBC crew. That was the most dangerous. Ethiopia, I didn't know what to expect. I knew there would be danger because there was war in the north as well as famine. Everything biblical you could think of going wrong was going wrong up there. But it became by far the most difficult, but also the most rewarding story of my life. I never felt smaller than when I was doing this, the biggest story of my life, because you're surrounded by things you just cannot imagine. Catastrophe on a gigantic scale. Also, acts of mercy that just you're dumbfounded at the goodness of people trying to save others at the same time, and the courage of people with courage that you don't really have. And it did leave me a more serious person afterwards, and a lot more interested in the stories of the world that did deal with the humanitarian issues, the downtrodden, and civil rights issues, the set upon and the bullied and what have you. So it gave a kind of seriousness to both my life and my reporting. So I look back on Ethiopia as an event, that tortured me a great deal, but also rewarded me, and still to this day does, because I'm still in touch with Ethiopia. I've been back many times, and I'm involved in some works over there that give me great pleasure. So that's kind of my answer to that, I guess.
It's tremendous to hear. There are a couple of, actually more than two, big global conflicts happening right now. If you were a foreign correspondent right now, what would be the top destination on your list?
Well, unfortunately, and to my great terror, I would really have to put Gaza up there, because I think there's an issue of the inability of foreign reporters to get into Gaza if it was open. I think it's an enormous story that has to be covered, because the world has a certain responsibility. Whenever the word famine is raised, the world has to take it seriously. Occasionally it's exaggerated, because famines are actually quite rare. But when they do happen, it's the worst aspect of war you can really find. It's the worst aspect of life that you can find, because it's the slow torture to death of families in front of each other. The mother watches her children die one by one. The husband dies, or the husband watches the wife and the child die. And these agonies are going on, and you try and imagine for a second how you would feel if you were one of them. I'm not putting a finger on anywhere. I'm just saying there should be independent observers there to tell whether the risk is exaggerated or whether it's very real. One way or the other, the world has to take it very seriously until it's sorted out. So that's the one I choose. It's the one I least like to go to. The one I would want to go to would be the Ukraine. I've been following the Ukraine-Russia war very closely for years now, and I spent a lot of my life covering military affairs and reading and studying about them. So I think I would be more suited to covering the Ukrainian war. But, if the priority has to be, I think right now, Gaza, then Ukraine, I think.
If someone wanted to follow in your footsteps, someone wants to be a foreign correspondent for, Network X, whatever it is, what would you say to them? What would your advice be, or your heads up to them?
Well, a heads up is be very, very careful in preparing for it. If you have the love for it, the most you prepare by reading an awful lot, really studying the world, getting before you go over, really getting a solid sense of how crises rise, how crises are settled, how wars begin, how wars end. All of those things are subjects you're going to have to need. And also be very careful of risk, because the risks out there now are graver than they were by far, I think, during my time. We're in a sort of vortex of spinning catastrophes and bad events and crises. And the dangers of drones and roadside bombs and kidnapping and what have you are very serious out there to take, the physical risk, but also be very prepared for the mental and emotional risks that can really affect one. If you see too much of horror, it does have a psychic scar tissue, as I used to call it, that will really linger. And I would advise one to be, almost therapy in advance for the kind of things you'd see. But don't always take, the other factor is I don't want to make it too dire. It's a fabulous career, and there are wonderful things to cover. I mean, I covered the fall of the Berlin Wall, the fall of communism in Europe. I covered, all sorts of royal visits, papal visits, you name it. Peace conferences. I actually covered probably more peace conferences than I did wars, which were 10 of those. So there's a wonderful ability to see life and to see history in the making that I don't think any other job really has to that degree. And that it is spectacular, but by heavens, prepare well for it. And don't be too eager to get to it. Get your experience domestically first, nationally first, before you go overseas, because that's not a place to be learning abroad and covering a crisis or a conflict.
You were on the doorstep of so many pivotal moments in our lifetime. And the book is not all doom and gloom. There are some really lighter moments in the book that I really treasured as well. And again, I'm not going to ruin it for those who are going to pick up the book. It's called On the Ground, My Life as a Foreign Correspondent. Brian Stewart has been our guest. Brian, thank you so much for the time. I thoroughly enjoyed the book. Good luck with it.
Oh, thanks very much, Rick. I really enjoyed it myself. Thank you.
And thank you for checking out the Newsmakers podcast. A big round of applause to the all-star cast behind the scenes as well. If you like today's episode, click the thumbs up, hit subscribe, leave a comment. You can catch the Newsmakers podcast on chch.com/podcasts and wherever you get your favorite podcasts.